Another day, another week. We sometimes take for granted that we have week to week, and we look back how many weeks now since COVID we've been really at it since for Bible studies. And well done to all of you who've probably been to every class. I'm not sure if we have a log to figure out who's been the number one attendee. I think me, I've been teaching everyone. But well done to each and every one of you as we come to the conclusion of another series. It can never end. It's a very uh, key subject, really. And we can never exhaust the subject of relationships. I think most people, when they heard about the series being taught regarding relationships, they thought we'd be talking about husband and wives, or they thought we'd talk about, the typical relationships between male, female. And I'll probably just do a red throw a ringer in today and really probably end with that. Just some insight from a psychological point of view and biblical point of view as to, let's see what topic I'd use for this one today. Some reason why people stay in relationships they shouldn't. So that might be a good one. What do you think? Reasons why people stay in relationships they shouldn't. There's about some key things I want to share with you with that. I was thinking about continuing with the Cain and Abel story, looking at the family tree. And there's lots of notes I've got on those things, which I can probably pick up again sometime. But what I want to do is to open with some questions. I want you to pose some questions and just review what we have covered thus far. We've covered quite a lot over the last couple of weeks. I think this is week 4 of relationships, and we can just get a little review. We had a brilliant review the other day from our sister Sandra Amajor, who gave us a little background on the first week or two. We talked about our relationships, what are we harvesting, investing, and the gratitude or the grace that we need for relationships as a whole. Anyone can remember any specifics about some of those things that we covered before when we talked about the wisdom we need for relationships? When we think about harvesting, what were some of the key things that we talked about? How we harvest relationships? Don't answer all at once now. It's not a trick question.
Well, sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll just, what I've written down. You spoke about, am I ready for relationship? Are there issues you need to address before you get into a relationship? Mm-hmm. You spoke about you must have a harvest mentality.
Yeah.
What you give to the relationship, what you reap, you will sow. We spoke about Galatians. Mm-hmm. And I can't read a lot of my handwriting, but it was mainly just, sometimes we get into relationships with an agenda without appreciating what's all behind it. Mm-hmm. And we should choose choose God's wisdom. God should always be behind it.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, just sometimes you need God, God behind your thinking, not just going into it boldly for your own purpose, what you want to get out of it. And sometimes, as you've just asked the question, why do people stay in it? They've gotten into it, and sometimes the fear, depending on what goes on, they can't get out of it. Or, for their own, whatever they've attained from it, they don't want to leave it behind, even though it may not be a good relationship that it might be.
Yeah. And it works for all sorts of relationships, doesn't it? Not just husband and wife. You find it even in a work setting, you can find that. Or someone you consider to be a good friend at one point in time, or even among, family, we find that relationships can break down because of issues. And it could be so many things that could affect a relationship. And it's we look in society today and we see that's a biggie. I think when Dr. Denner was speaking on Sunday, he was talking about peace, and he was kind of given I wouldn't say a negative view on humanity, but when we consider humanity, if we put our trust in man, we're bound to fail, isn't it? At some point, we're going to be disappointed. And all the wars in the world right now, if you really check all the wars that's going on in the world, it's between brothers, isn't it? Very interesting. I was watching a series on Netflix recently, and it was about the the fighting going on in Rwanda back in the 90s, that massacre, that absolute horror story of nearly 800,000 to 1 million people that were killed. And it's tribes, people who were brothers and sisters living next door to each other, turning on one another, Hutus and Tutsis. And it was quite shocking, actually, when you think of the whole story behind that so many people could have lost their lives because of dogma and people's, we look at what happened in Yugoslavia or former Yugoslavia with the Croats and the Serbs. And we see around the world, all these things are brothers at war, different tribalisms going on in different parts of the world. It's not just people think tribalism is just an African thing, no, but we all have tribes. You got the English have issues with the Irish and the Scots and the Welsh, as long as, you can go back in history with the Druids and the Saxons, all the different the Celts and whatever else. You go back in history and you can see that there's a breakdown in society. I saw an interview this week. It's quite interesting. It's interesting how people jump on certain bandwagons. And the interesting thing about the video, it was referring to Kirk Franklin. I don't know if anyone ever seen the video this week. Kirk Franklin had made a statement on in his social media that he was no longer supporting the television network TBN, because at the recent Dove Awards, which is like an award like a Grammys, the Christian version of the Grammys, he made a statement about the recent injustices regarding civil rights, and they edited what he had to say. The actual Christian television edited what he said. He said they'd done it before, and they apologized, and they did it again most recently, and he felt that he would not support them, and he was very vocal. And so someone jumped on the bandwagon saying, this guy's not a Christian, but he posted it and thinking, look, the man Kirk, he said everyone respects Kirk Franklin. They know how well known he is. So I kind of looked it up. I was watching the video, but when I looked on YouTube, Kirk's got his own YouTube channel, and he also posted a video of reconciliation, because what happened is that his pastor, who happens to be Dr. Tony Evans, Tony Evans, he's the father of Priscilla Sher, or what's her name? The girl the lady that the pastor, the minister that did the war room. Yeah, the whole Evans family is well known. So he's his pastor, Kirk Franklin's pastor, and they met with the head of TBN and also with Robert Morris, another well-known white pastor, and they sat down and had a serious conversation about the whole issue and apologized and brought reconciliation. And what I looked at, it was that it's so easy for people to look at the negative. Okay, Kirk came out and said, he wasn't asking any other ministers not to support TBN. He was just saying, listen, as far as he's concerned, he wants to make it public because he made a public statement about civil rights, about the injustices, that the quietness and the silence of white preachers and white evangelicals is not acceptable. And he wanted everyone to stand together and to pray, and they prayed and whatever. And it just so happened that this TV station edited out what he said about that, and he thought it was a bit rude and wrong, and he thought they weren't supportive. So anyway, they sat down in a round table. And what we're talking about is relationships. He could have burnt bridges there, but his pastor got involved, Tony Evans, and he's a very wise man. I'd encourage you. If not, I'll post the video to, I'm not sure if I sent to Marlene, but I think I'll send it to you, and you can distribute it. But it's a very powerful, it just shows you how that even if a relationship comes to a place of failing, where something happens negatively, and we've been looking at this over the last couple of weeks, how we can restore the relationship. If we can't do it, we need to find someone who can be like some kind of mediator that would come in. And that's what Tony Evans did. That's what Robert Morris did. And they all sat down with Crouch, coming up with his first name, the guy, his son who took over. And they sat down and they built a bridge, and they apologized, and they did whatever. And Kirk said really what the most powerful thing that happened beyond the screens, that what everyone would have seen, was that he and this fellow had a meeting outside of what we saw, and it was really positive. It was a real, icing on the cake so much. And funny you said icing on the cake, because it says sometimes people see the outside, but they don't know what's going on the inside, and those things are important. And Robert Morris is important as well in the conversation, because he talked about racism, and he actually referred to a conference that he held And he said now when he does conferences, he always has a part to play where he teaches his white pastors that they need to have a voice and speak about social injustices in their congregations. They need to talk about it. So when we're talking about relationships, I want us to think not just just the typical husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend. We're talking about relationship on an everyday level, even as church people. And he talked about prejudice, what prejudice means, and said we know what pre means. It's always something, we before, or it's a prefix. So we think of it in Judas, which speaks of judgment. So we prejudge situation. We all have prejudices, and he talked about how the Lord dealt with him and his prejudices. And he said his daughter married a black man, and they have children, and he said it's one of the best things that is that's ever happened in his family, that bringing his family together. And you could see when he talked even about his daughter marrying a black man, and he's talking to a 90% white audience, you could actually feel how uncomfortable it was. But I think when we're talking about relationships, these are conversations, I think, even as a black people, a predominantly black church, we should be willing to have those kind of conversations with our fellow peers and be all embracing. I know we probably have issues if our church started having white folks started coming to our church, and we shouldn't have a problem with that. I don't think we should ever have a problem with that. So we have to look at ways in how we can embrace it, because I know we have a lot of things in society. And he said one of the things, and I think probably Mother Lydia would probably like Robert Morris, because he said it's important for us to educate the ignorant white people concerning race, and he talked about that as a white man himself, how ignorant his people are in regards to understanding what it is that we have to deal with on a day-to-day thing. And why I'm bringing this up, because I'm talking about relationships, and when we look back to the Bible days, one of the things he said, it's very, most theologians concur that Adam and Eve that we talked about in our stories was not what we see in the books today, the typical children's. But even sometimes I'm reading some of the Bible stories to Isabella at night, and I'm looking at the artwork, and all of it refers to Adam and Eve, even Jesus, as white. And it's very likely what he said, when you look at the story of Adam and Eve, more than likely that they were not white, they were very brown people. Because when it comes down to Noah, and I'm going to our stories in the scriptures, we're looking at relationships. When Noah named his sons, the first one he called his name Japheth. His name means fair. When he spoke of Ham, he means black. And then when he spoke of his middle son, his name means name, literally. And it's very likely that he had a white son, he had a black son, and he had a brown son, because they were both brown. And so you can never get white or black from white or black. It can only come from brown. And so when you think about sometimes when we think about relationships, people become prejudiced because of lack of knowledge or a sense of superiority, etc., etc., and it hinders relationships. And I'm not just talking about in the communities that we live, just because, particularly in Britain, we need to be able to talk about these things because we live among people, we work among people, and I think it's not good for us to harbor prejudices because it hinders our relationships. We could have possibly very good relationships with people if we didn't have these walls that we had up. Wrongs done to us in the past doesn't mean that everyone's like that. And so what I'm saying is that we can hinder future relationships because of hidden prejudices. It happens even in the church. It's very subtle sometimes, and people don't address it. And I think it's important that we address some of these core issues, because if it happened in the Bible days, it will happen in our days. And we thank God for grace. We thank God for Jesus, who came on the scene and brought down the barriers and help us to see clearly. And I think there's still a lot of people who have issues around race, and they're trying to use scripture sometimes to justify their ignorance. And I think that can never be successful if we also know what the Bible teaches. So I think when we're talking about relationships, I really wanted to have not a narrow view, but to have a wide view that we can see on all levels, that we can have a conversation. And I've spoken to many guys who are probably more smarter than I, probably more educated than I in historical things. I've got friends who are professors in history, written books on history, Black history particularly. And when you get in their company, they start having this conversation, it goes south really. It's always very negative and very pitiful to some degree. And of course, you hear what they're saying, but there's a passage, and I want to read it to you, that Tony Evans quoted, that really just, he has a way of just communicating the word that I think is so important, especially in today's world. We need the wise heads. We can't afford that everyone would lose their heads. Amen. So it's Psalms 89 and verses 14. And it reads, let's give you a quick review. It says, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne, and love and faithfulness go before you. And it's not one or the other. Righteous and justice actually go hand in hand. In all our relationships, I think if there's no righteousness in our relationship, we'll never experience any form of justice. And we need to maintain that. We need to always, it's Psalms 89:14, just if you want to, just a background, just checking on that. It's so important. So as we move on from this, I really want to just put that out there, just to say, when we're talking about relationships, I wanted you to think beyond just your immediacy of need, family, but to look and thinking, what's my relationship like on a social level? Do I really care about the man that I walk past on the street every day? I think of stories like the man at the gate, beautiful. In Acts chapter 3, the Bible said that they walked past him every day. The guy was there for 40 years. They didn't want to ever take notice. It's only after Pentecost that they stopped, that they actually physically stopped and looked at him and paid attention to him. The man at the gate, beautiful. For 38 years, someone had to bring him there every single day, in John chapter 5, and place him at that place. And you look right throughout scripture and you find particular individuals who would be ignored and not even noticed. But then the Bible identifies them. The widow's mite, Jesus said to his disciples, take a look at this sister as she gives her offering. And there's so many different stories. The widow at Nain who lost her son, that relationship was broken through death. And that's another area of ministry that I think we can address. How do we minister to someone who's been in a relationship for a long time, and that relationship has now been broken through death? Also, someone's relationship that's been broken through divorce. We have lots of people on our platforms in our churches who's had someone who once said, I do, someone who once promised that they'll be with you until in sickness and in health, until death do we part, and they broke the relationships by not physical death, but the relationship. Divorce speaks of death. It's a die. It's a death in broken fellowship, literally. And so those are things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's how the church really got to focus on, how can we minister to the broken? I think I was mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we talk about I'm okay. And in reality is that people are not telling us that they're broken, because in the middle of broken is the word okay. And we need to focus on, can we get past the mishmash, the walls that people put up and the facade, and say, let's pull the shutters up and let's see how we can address some of these core issues. I hope you are making sense to you, because I really wanted to broaden our thinking, that we're not just thinking, okay, when we talk about relationships, I'm thinking, is Bishop going to just talk to us about, because not everyone, I've had this before when we've had meetings like this, people thinking they don't want to come and just listen to people who are married. They want to hear about real stuff. And I think we've covered a lot of that over the last couple of weeks. And I think these are critical things that's happening in your workplace. Those things are important. Your relationship with your fellow workmates, those things are important. I think, and it's also part of our Christian witness. We're salt and we're meant to be light in our communities. How do we get on with people in our communities, our neighbors, and just the wider world? Because we're here in this world, though we're not of it, we're here to be a witness to people, and our relationships matter. Where people are talking about lives, Black Lives Matter, this life matters, whatever. We have a different narrative. Yes, we agree that right now, what we see in the light of things, that these individual lives do matter, but we're saying humanity matters to God. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So our message has got to be central, but our methodology can be different. We can use it in different ways in how we relate to one another and deal with everyday stuff. So I'll just open up that for a little bit, because I want to go somewhere else with that. But I just thought, in a review of what we've covered, talking about harvesting, investing, the grace that we need. And then we looked at the stories between Adam and Eve, we looked at Cain, we looked at Abel. And if you read through chapter 4 into chapter 5, you'll see an interesting scenario unfold. In chapter 6 talks about God, only Noah found favor in God's sight because he was at that point vexed literally that he had made man. And of course, thank God for Noah. And then the story evolved. You can read through the whole thing. We could never get out of Genesis even if we took a whole year. It was just phenomenal, the whole study. But Genesis talks about genes. It talks about our origin, where we came from. And I think you'll find a lot of human problems found in the book of Genesis. It started there. And we thank God for Jesus, because the New Testament start with Matthew with another genealogy list. If you look at the genealogy list in Matthew 1, you'll see a whole mixed mash of people. And at the end of it, it shows you that they were all related to Jesus. And we thank God that Jesus broke the chains. He set the record straight and put us on the street called straight. That helped us to really have a turnaround. So when we look at the Bible, it gives you the answers to all the ills. And if we would follow it, if we would walk in it and fulfill and obey rather what's been said, and we know it's not by our might or power, but by the Spirit of God, we would see so many different changes in our society as a whole. And we'd feel better as a whole. Absolutely. So with all that said, I want to throw out any questions you may have regarding all that stuff. And then we're going to push on with today's lesson. Which would just be really quick, just some key things I want to bring to your attention, and then we can be here. So who wants to start with a question or two? Let's do it. So in the whole weeks that's passed, this is your time just to, any question that you may have been musing on, mulling over, meditating on, yeah, you can do that. Or else I'll just go straight into this hot potato subject I've got for you today. Is that Geraldine? Hands up?
It is.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see you now. No, it was less of a question, and I guess more of a reflection when you were talking about sort of the kind of the divisions and the and how I guess that kind of tribalism can get in the way of things. And it just reminded me of when the Black Lives Matters protests were happening. I'm not sure if I shared this, but I personally got to a point where I felt it was quite draining. I think a lot of us shared in one session how emotionally and spiritually draining it had been. And I decided, I think at the end of 1 week, to take a day off. And when I came back to work, my line manager and I have we check in with each other sort of every couple of weeks, but we speak a lot anyway. And he said, "Oh, how was your day off?" And I said, and I took that opportunity to just be really honest. And I said, living whilst Black is actually really exhausting at the moment with everything that's going on, and actually just trying to do life as normal. And it opened up an opportunity to just say, look, these are things that actually I've been dealing with my whole life. Now there's a spotlight that's shed upon it, and it's brought up a lot of things for people because it's been quite traumatic. And I think in having that conversation, for him as a white man, he was then able to understand it from the perspective of one human to another. Yeah. So the point that I'm making is that I think when we use the opportunities as humans to have those conversations or to have those interactions, it doesn't need to be about race. It could be about family. It could be about a spousal relationship, a romantic relationship, but you have to take it in terms of that human to human level. You talk about how it felt and your experience. That's when we can start to really have a proper conversation and see each other.
Yeah.
And
I think it's needful. I think it's needful to seize those moments to really get someone. I think one of the things Robert Morris talked about, he got a water bottle and he turned it towards the congregation and he asked them what they could see. And, the camera zoomed in on it. So they put it on the big screen behind him. And at the front of the bottle, it had something like Ozark on it. But he couldn't see what was on the front. So he said, sometimes what we do, we see things from one point of view. what we need to do is to come around to the other point of view and see it from a different perspective. Because as long as we just look, if I'm just looking at this phone and just looking at the back of it, that's all I'm seeing, but I'm not seeing what's on the front of it. So it's important for us to really take another look sometimes, and even to see things from a white person's perspective, because sometimes they have unconscious bias and raised in a community that makes them think a particular way. And it's not that they're intentionally racist, it's just a perspective of how they've been raised and the way they think. And you wonder, can we, the statement by Rodney King many years ago, why can't we all just get along? And it's been an issue. You look at how long ago that was, those riots in LA so many moons ago. And yet here we are again. And I think, will we say this 20 years from now, who's going to be the next victim of another issue? Because as human beings, we find it difficult to sit down and have a conversation without becoming aggressive, over assertive, and whatever. I mean, there's so many things, and the media doesn't help, because they really, with today, everyone has a phone and recording, and you upload a link. I mean, I see daily posts from people. Sometimes people send me in Messenger. I mean, I get constant barrage of stuff that comes at your mind, and you're thinking, oh, not another one. And sometimes you get to a point where you become, I think, as Geraldine was saying, the thought that came to my mind on the news recently, I think it was just yesterday, I saw Donald Trump has released the federal, he's released the big boys on the street. You never send troops on the street unless you're going to expect serious disaster. And there were some two soldiers were actually kneeling on a woman yesterday, and she was saying, I can't breathe. And it wasn't a black woman, it was a white woman. And she, because people, since George Floyd, there has still been, every single day, people are out there protesting every single day since. And it's not just blacks. I'm talking about people from all races. And what I'm looking at is, in a time like this, we can become so exhausted by everything else, because we're thinking, oh man, I'm tired of this. And I think sometimes we lack the stamina to fight for something that's meaningful to us, and I'll just take up the fight. And we get exhausted thinking, okay, let's put this aside now. I've just had enough of that. I can't deal with that anymore. Yet someone else is still fighting and standing in the civil rights continues, it doesn't go away. And those are the things we can get really exhausted by the fact. And it always takes someone to continue. I know it's a continuum, and you're thinking, how am I going to really deal with these matters, every single day? And having that conversation can be a icebreaker. It could really change something. It could really turn the tables in a lot of people's lives if we take the time. So relationally, I think it's something that, how far will we go to restore, to repair, because what did Jesus say in the Beatitudes? Said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called what? The children of God. And peacemaking it's not like being a referee. It's not like being, where two people are clubbing the life out of each other and you're trying to stand in the middle because you know the rules and you can, say this one wins and that one. It's a total different thing. And we need the Holy Spirit each time to help us. So I think I'll stop there regarding that, because there's more to it. We could talk about that as well. But like I said, it's a broad sweep of looking at, when we're talking relationally, there is so many areas that we could really cover in the light of ministry, because we live in a community. And John Maxwell wrote a book called Winning with People. And he said, it's always about people. If you're in church, if you're in ministry, it's always about how can we win with the people that we've got. I'm not talking about, we're not competing against each other, but we're in this business together. And at the end of the day, me having an argument with you and me winning, I win an argument, but I lose a soul. And that's been the nature of the church for years, that we love winning arguments, but at the end of the day, we lose a soul. We're not thinking about the individual, because we are so determined to make sure I won this fight, I won this battle. So I'll move on. Today's lesson is, if I was to conclude, and it's not a concluding lesson, but it's just a conclusion of this particular series. And we've covered a wide range, like I said already. I've already reviewed that. And I want to look at 7 reasons why people stay in a relationship when they shouldn't. And just to look at some things. And I want you to be involved in this. I don't want to just be here talking and you are just listening, doing your usual. I've got to finish this lesson and go and cook. So, you got to bear with me, and I'm good, it's all good. I love cooking. So, and I'm a late nighter. My wife said, you like late night stuff. It's not good. I'm training and I'm still eating late, Mother Lydia. It's not a good practice. Don't tell Ron now. Don't tell him. Don't let him even watch the video. Just tell him don't watch this video tonight. But that aside, 7 reasons why people stay in. What can you just maybe just throw this out? What do you think give me some reasons why you think a person will stay in a relationship when they shouldn't, and then I'll give you my version. Let's open the mics up. Why would people stay in relationships, and see if we can nail any of these that I've got on my list? Why would someone stay in a relationship when they shouldn't? Okay, so Janice's hands up. Someone says shame. Janice, go for it.
I guess some people, I should say, stay in relationship if 1, they're married, 2, there's kids involved. You try to work on it. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of us do it because of the sake of the kids. So we decide to work on it as long as we can cope.
Yeah. That's true. Someone else said fear. Anyone else? I'll talk more about what Janice said because it's in my notes. Someone says low self-esteem. My God, it just knocked my notes right out the ballpark.
Sometimes
that's the number one.
Sometimes too much to lose.
Too much to lose. Yeah, Interesting. Someone says hope. Someone's hoping for the best. Yeah, that happens, isn't it? Sometimes we cling to hope.
Yeah.
We believe that no matter what, we're going to believe that this person's going to turn around. They're going to change, and 20 years later, you still believe in that.
Commitment.
Sometimes they don't want to restart again.
That's true. That's a very good one. You're thinking, God, do I have to go? But that's a dangerous thing, isn't it? That's like double jeopardy. You're thinking, if I stay with this person, then do I have to go through all that again? Maybe it's better off being single, isn't it? Fear of being alone. Yes. That's in my notes as well. Have you been reading my notes? Who's been giving my notes out? Okay. Anxiety. Yeah. Who said anxiety? Oh, Charlene said anxiety. What do you mean, Charlene? Charlene.
Yeah, Bishop. What I mean is anxiety, fearing, not knowing the unknown, fearing what is to come.
Yeah.
And then the enemy starts playing with your mind because it then becomes a battle in your mind. Mm-hmm. So you say better the devil you know than the devil you don't, and the grass is not green on the other side. Especially for us.
True. Especially with what?
Especially for us women.
Okay.
You sometimes become comfortable in the mess because that's all you know.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's all you know. All you know is mess. All you know is disaster. All you know is you don't know peace. So if peace comes, how do you manage it?
Wow. You guys really want me to finish the series today, do you? No, that's deep. That's deep. That's very powerful, Charlene. Seriously, because I know as you're speaking, I'm seeing faces of people, and I'm not talking about people in church. There's friends that I know from way back when they've told me their stories. There's a friend of mine, when she was married, her husband used to batter her. I mean, she even got a crack in her skull, and she was going to church, and the people in the church were trying to say, "You must stay in the marriage. Marriage is honorable, and bed is undefiled." And she just couldn't take all that. The mothers were in the church were trying to make her feel bad for wanting to walk away from this man who was battering her. You know what the man actually said to her? The only way he'd ever leave her is in the body bag. That kind of threat. I'm like, I was just listening to that caused me pain because, I knew her from I was a kid. And when I was hearing that story, I'm thinking, if I could ever see that guy, what I'd do to him, I wouldn't be on this platform right now. But I'm telling you, that really just, because I don't like domestic abuse. I remember when I was a kid, I lived next door to a guy that, I always remember this as a kid. There's some things you never forget as children. And there's this guy, he must have hit his girlfriend next door, and they called the cops. And Jamaican police are not like British police, they're different. They're different. I can just remember them saying to him, "Pull up your shirt," and they just, you could hear they laid the baton on him. They're laying enough. It wasn't laying enough hands. It was laying enough batons, and seeing them dragging him out the house, whatever. But he never went back to that relationship. You never saw him back in the community anyway. But for me, I always remember and seeing the bruises on someone's face, and it's a horrible. I think some of those things it's a diabolical. And sometimes we know there's reasons why people do whatever, but I don't think there's any justice in when a man strikes a woman, and vice versa. Because there's some women that beat up men. I haven't met any of them men, but it happens. And it happens a lot, especially in the lockdown. They said a lot of domestic violence is really peaked. And it's a serious issue. So you've raised some serious issues here. People stay because they're thinking, let's stay in this mess. But my friend, she took flight. She left. She left with her kids. And, you know, funny enough, the guy, actually, that partner for her, the husband of hers, actually ended up in jail for something else. He was, you know, and so, and then the whole relationship petered off. And now he owes, America will come after you if you owe child support. So that's a serious issue. That's another case altogether. But what I'm saying is that people sometimes, even from a Christian point of view, sometimes we try to force people to stay in a relationship because of our dogma, and what we, how the church will look, and how, forget all that foolishness. I would never advise anybody to stay in a relationship where they're being physically abused, even verbally abused. For what? You know, be separated and get counsel, but don't stay in that. When a person comes on drunk and behaving stupid and whatever else, there's no reason for that. That needs some space. Anytime your life is in jeopardy, I got sisters, I got girls, daughters. I'm not, God help me if any man ever put his hand on any of my kids. It doesn't matter if they're married or not. You know, you think I'm training for nothing. I'm old enough to go do prison ministry, trust me. But the emphasis is that the reality is that you want to protect, and you know, you want to deliver your loved ones from that kind of drama. And sometimes they keep quiet, they don't want to talk about it, and they suffer in silence and shame. Someone put shame on the screen, and those are serious reasons why people stay in relationships. Anyone else? There's a whole lot. Shanice again.
Yeah, can I just comment on the abuse bit, because I'm a living testimony. A lot of time that you leave the relationship and your own parent who is in Christ send you back to your husband going back home. So who do you go to?
Find
so a
somebody
lot
else.
of time is your own relative who actually, it's like they pick the husband's side more than even yours.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural. I think sometimes it's a cultural thing as well, and they don't. And maybe sometimes because even some of the mothers of old, they've had that and felt the shame of you coming to them is like they did this big expensive wedding and now you come back caught up in their house and whatever, and they're thinking go back to your husband. That's just foolishness. I think that's cultural, and I think it's wrong on many levels, and I think you'd have to find another place to go. You know, when the man was found half dead on the road of Jericho, Jesus talked about the Samaritan, took him to a place where he could be cared for, where he could be looked after. They have so many, and they talk about this so much even now in this country, that if someone is suffering from domestic violence, they're numbers to call. There's places, refuge that people can find, shelter that people can find. And I think no one should really suffer like that. That's a terrible, terrible thing to go through. Physical violence is a horrible thing in any capacity. And in it, man, I know my views on that. Trust me, I don't know if I could be a cop. Because if I walked in on that, I think some years ago they're doing adverts for being police. And I think Lennox Lewis, many years ago, they talked about it. And Lennox Lewis did this advert as thinking, could you be a cop if you walked in on a scene where someone was beating someone else up? And he was like looking, and that's how it kind of ended, because you're thinking, you know, Lennox Lewis is like 6'6" or whatever, heavyweight champion of the world. You know what would happen if he walks in a room and a guy was doing that to someone. But the reality is that, you know, violence begets violence, and, you know, that's not the answer really. But the emphasis is you have to find a way. These are serious issues. So let me move on with my point, because I know we could talk about some of the things that you mentioned, and many of you, some of the things that you said, I have in my notes, and I'm going to run through some of these things. And if the emphasis here is this, losing will not always amount to a loss, because sometimes you lose a relationship. It doesn't mean that's the end of it. And I think someone said that you probably think, if I step out of this relationship, maybe Charlene was referring to, that if all you know is mess, and you may feel, or like what Janice says, if I lose this relationship, it's not necessarily a loss. You may have gained your life back, because sometimes we look at it as it's finished. You know, can I ever come back to, you know, any kind of dignity or self-worth, or, you know, is it a failure? John Maxwell again talks about failing forward. We all have moments where we stumble. We with the best intent, our relationships was never set. We never went into a relationship expecting it to fail, because we were wooed by our narrative. We had the lyrics. How many of you women had some super lyrical guy speaking to your ear, and then you look back over the years and thinking, God Almighty, what was that rubbish about? Because we're very lyrical, and I think of someone asked the question, and maybe I can ask myself the question, because I was thinking of it the other day as I was this morning, funny enough, and I was thinking, would I advise any of my girls to be with a guy like me? And it was I was asking myself the question. I won't tell her the answer. I'll mail it to you. But the emphasis is because I think of how I used to be before Christ, and what I would say, and would I really mean it? Because in the best intention, you say all these different things. It was just really baiting the hook. Guys go after gold, glory, or girls, and it's all about, we bait the hook, because once you get what you want, then you're looking for another fish, and it's the culture you're living as well, and unless you've been educated differently, you're not thinking long term. You're not thinking, how would I build a relationship for the long term, and with eternity in view from a Christian perspective. And sometimes even people in the church, the worst experience they had was not when they it wasn't in the world. Their worst experience in relationships was maybe in church, which is another shocker, which can really send you over the edge, isn't it? Where you thought, man, my relationships in the world were a lot better than, and that's a bad testimony to the brothers or sisters that they've encountered in the church. So in regards to losing, it's not always about loss. Sometimes you have to lose toxic relationships and bad habits to create space for better things. And better things will come, because as long as you are breathing and there is a God who watches over you, he will always make sure that there's a better. And sometimes you may be thinking, when will it ever happen? Believe and trust him. He is able, because better will, one, you have space, you have your mind, it's better. You're thinking, well, it's all right for you, but at night all you have to hug is a pillow or whatever. But the emphasis is that you have to be at a place where you're thinking, you know what, it's better to have that than to have you don't have peace of mind. I think gaslighting is a serious thing, that someone can have you. I don't know if you understand the terminology gaslighting, but it's a terminology where I mean, that's a different lesson altogether. But people can be very good at making you feel a certain way, and you actually start believing it. You actually start believing this is how things are, when in reality, that's not so. The people, the narrative, the storylines you've seen in movies and wherever else and whatever, is so much context to it, where people are very good at making you feel insecure, making you feel as if it's your fault. And you want to stay in that cycle, because you feel, even in the midst of feeling unsafe, it's probably the safest thing, because like someone said, anxiety, you fear, they say it's better the devil you know than the one you don't. So you step out, you're afraid to step out. And so the responsibility is, can I care for myself? And sometimes selfishly, you have to make you the number one choice, and not to accept the other person's garbage. And so garbage in, garbage out. Emphasis is this: relationships are normally complex. Most couples have highs and lows in their relationships, or anyone generally, and it happens to everyone. Not everything is perfect all the time. This is not, in Jamaica, we said, when I was growing up, they said dolly house. It's not, Ken and Barbie. It's not Mills and Boone. There is no perfect relationship. I kid you not. No relationship that you know of is perfect. And just look in the mirror. There's no relationship you've had, as good as it may be. And, there's a movie that's called As Good As It Gets. But you look at it thinking, there's no perfect relationship. It's what you make of it. What you see in the mirror is just a reflection anyway. What you see in the mirror doesn't define who you are. You have to also recognize, listen, man, I have to deal with me. I think the biggest issue we have in any relationship, number one, is to deal with us and how we interpret life, how we view and put value on things. And sometimes we put value on people more than we put value on ourselves. And you find that a lot of people get conned into relationships where one becomes codependent. They can't do anything without the other person. And I think it's important for people to have skills. And I think in the world we live in, particularly, I think a lot of women actually find themselves vulnerable because they're depending on the man to do everything for their whole life. Or some men don't even know how to work a washing machine. They don't know how to cook their own food. I mean, if you know, there's pros and cons. There's things that people are so dependent on that they think if this person is not around, I can't function, I can't survive. And we need to develop a sense of worth, knowing our value comes primarily from the Lord, and really build a relationship on that what you do will not change who I am as a person. So some key things, and I'm going to highlight seven things why people stay in a relationship they shouldn't. Number one is this, and someone put it on the chat a while ago: low self-esteem. What is that? What does that look like? One of the reasons that someone may stay in a relationship that is no longer happy or healthy may be because they have a low self-esteem. Someone who has high self-esteem is able to see that they're worth more than a relationship that constantly makes them miserable. They're able to understand when it's time to leave for their own mental health. And on the other hand, someone who has low self-esteem may feel that if they speak up about their unhappiness in a relationship, they'll be faced with rejection. And I want to put that out to you. So low self-esteem is how you see yourself. If you don't have a healthy self-esteem, you will accept whatever someone else in a dominant position will say to you. But if you have a high self-esteem, it is more likely that you will be able to take a stand that this behavior is unacceptable and this will no longer be the case. This relationship, you can decide for yourself that you don't have to accept that. And I think that's a challenging thing, even from a Christian point of view, that where does a balance come? Someone mentioned it earlier, hope. How long will you hold on to that rope? Where you're taking a battering, you're taking a mental battering, your soul is famished. You're longing for particular things and you're not experiencing it. Where do you draw the line? Open that. Let's hear it. So we're talking about low self-esteem. That's one of the reasons we stay longer in a relationship than we shouldn't, because we feel that we're trapped. We're trapped. There's a movie with I think what's her name now? Julia Roberts. She played this character where she actually ran away from her husband and moved to another state. I can't remember the name of the movie, but she actually had to run for her life and live in a different place. He eventually tracked her down and tried to kill her. But that's a
Sleeping
serious
with the enemy. Sorry.
Sleeping with the enemy. Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. But that's the real. I mean, this is something that happens in modern day Britain. Some of you may have been through that thing where people will just be tracking you down and you keep looking over your shoulder. It's a reality. Marlene, you had your hands up.
I think that's a really good point, Bishop. Sorry, good evening, everybody. Because I think if you're of that personality whereby you depend on someone else to make you feel good, and that person realizes that they have that position of power over you, that they can make you feel bad about yourself when you already look to them really for affirmation of how you feel, then if you've already got low self-esteem, then they're absolutely going to use that as a dominant force over you to continue to make you feel bad. And so you keep looking to that person for affirmation, you keep looking to that person for affection, but instead that person continues to make you feel bad about yourself. So the things that you're looking for to get that affirmation about do I look good in this, or does my hair look nice, and so when you're dependent on that person for the very thing that makes you want to step out the house and feel good about yourself, and they're saying to you, no, you look terrible, then that is really going to create in you, it's going to just really cement that low self-esteem that you have about yourself. So if you have that and that person realizes that they can use that over you, then absolutely that's going to destroy you even more. So I think it is a good point that if you are coming from that place of low self-esteem and you have somebody who can use that over you, then I think that that is not going to be a basis in any way for a good relationship at all.
Yeah, good point. Anyone else? I think it's a good point really to look at and think on a personal level. It's important for the Christian believer, and it's male, female, to have a strong relationship with the Lord and to be really conscious of who they are in the Lord, because that helps your esteem. It frames your mindset. And I think a lot of these things should actually happen in counseling. Unfortunately, people stumble into relationships without counseling, or even with counseling, these things never get addressed in dealing with the esteem, because you go into the relationship kind of, dating can be very dangerous in the sense that dating doesn't really tell you the whole story, because in dating, everyone gives you the best side of them. They give you the A version. They never give you the B version. They never let you see a weave out of place, or whatever out of place. Everything, sorry, did I say weave? But everything is almost perfect. So you never really get to see the person for who they really are. And I think it takes interrogation. It takes, because you're investing your life. I think if you're going to invest your life with someone, you really want to know, what is it that I'm going into? What is this person really like? What are their values? What are their family like? Get some background checks on them. If you're going to check, even financially, you want to financially know that you're going into relationships, because you may thinking, love, I love this person, but love don't pay the bills. And that's going to impact on the relationship at some point. And if someone has an issue with finance, that can bring a lot of problems into your relationship in the future. And so you have to address some things. You want to know, what's this person's, what's their sexual history like? Do they have a trail of women? What am I dealing with? Because mentally, someone who's been very sexually active, they have a lot of issues. That's a lot of self-esteem issues as well, because they feel they get their satisfaction by doing whatever. And so, am I just another notch on the belt? Am I just another victim? Am I just, is this a black widow? Is this someone who's going to come in and just gobble me up and, run off with my money? Do I have a prenuptial in a relationship? Those are questions that people may really ask. And sometimes we don't want to talk about those things, because someone may want to put a demand on your assets that you worked hard for. How do you address, you spend your years studying and working hard, and then now someone wants to take your stuff. What if you've had children from a previous relationship, you go into another relationship? How do you deal with that? How is this person going to treat your child? And those are things that, you have to consider those factors and questions that, because people rush headlong. I love movie titles because I use them for preaching, but fools rush in. People rush into relationship because I'm in love. You can't even counsel the person who tells you they're in love, because they don't want to hear nothing, but they only want you to say, just do the wedding for us because I'm in love and this person is perfect. And nothing you can say at that time is going to change their mind. As far as they're concerned, man, this is the best person ever. God sent his divine angel. This one came from heaven. So did Lucifer. We need to understand. We need to understand that it needs thought. And based on what I know now, after 29 years of marriage and experiences dealing with church folk, I realize there's a lot of things that we need to do differently in how we counsel, how we engage people in the light of relationally, why these things are so important, why your self-esteem should be at a high level going into a relationship, and also knowing what this person is like, what is their value, how do they esteem you, do they esteem you higher than themselves? Because this is biblical language you're talking about. We're not talking about something that's outside. Because esteem is important, that this person makes you feel good. How do they make you feel about yourself? Is the relationship based on me, or are they talking about, let me just plug my battery in? So can someone else jump in on that, please, so my laptop doesn't crash?
I've got a question, Bishop.
Yes.
Good evening, family. It's interesting because in talking to the young ladies, at our church, there were two things, and my daughters actually agreed with this. There are two things that a lot of our young people are concerned about. And one is self-image. And the second thing is relationships. And so the imagery is that everybody wants to look like one or the other of those celebrities that are out there, Kim Kardashian and so forth. I remember one of our young ladies said something like, there was a particular young man on Instagram. He had over 10,000 followers, and he had an issue with image. And he said, his request was to all of his followers that, can you please donate £1 each, so that I can go to Europe and have my biceps and triceps implanted. And he sure enough got that. And I think that something that I speak to my daughters about, which is just so important, is that don't go looking for love, because that love will never, ever satisfy you. If you look to Christ Jesus, the happiness, the joy, the comfort, the affirmation, the confirmation, the God who has your back, God who loves you more than anyone else can love you, that is where you need to start. Chasing down boys or girls, girls chasing down boys or boys chasing down girls, they will never find it. And so what happens is that you go from one relationship without even looking and reflecting on what went wrong. Two people are always culpable. And so you know, without looking at, okay, I realize within myself then, say if I was a young person, that I can be needy, or I need to have a bit of an outside life apart from this relationship, you know, all of those things. And, you know, they just, you know, people and even adults, they go from one relationship straight into the other without fully understanding the consequences of soul ties. You bring those spiritual ties from one person. So if you sleep with one person, that person who may have slept with how many dozens of people, your you know, women are their receivers, as Juanita Bynum told us many, many years ago. And so you've got a trailer load of soul ties that comes into one relationship that you're into, and it's not really kind of working out, because the kind of perfect person that I'm looking for is my last boyfriend. He did this for me, which was great, and I'm kind of looking for something else, somebody a bit more tactile than maybe somebody who would tell me that they love me every day. And so they go from one relationship straight into another relationship. Before you know it, sadly, the whole situation concerning, say, one individual is a hot mess. Yeah. And I think that we don't teach our young people enough. You know, we've got to kind of look past that situation, or that thinking that our children will grow up, and, you know, some of our children, they grow up and they're in Christ, and that is it. And they grow up and they get married and they have their husband, and that is a first relationship. That's what we want for all of our children, boys and girls. The reality is that they kind of aimlessly are wandering out there because they see something out there that looks exciting. Celebrities, they look at celebrities and think, oh yeah, I want that, and yeah, I can get that. And so before you know it, you've got young men who are pretty messed up because they don't have what the expectation is, the unrealistic expectation is that's out there. They don't necessarily have loads and loads of millions of dollars. They don't necessarily have the know-how to actually bring their daughter to a restaurant, you know, bring their girlfriend to a restaurant. One thing that my late husband and my husband-to-be has taught my daughters is that when somebody asks you to go out for a meal, this is what you should expect. Not no Nando's, not no blue and orange restaurant in Thornton Heath. I'm being deadly serious here. And you teach them the etiquette about the different forks and the knives. And it's things like this that I am constantly learning, because, you know, there isn't a textbook in terms of how you should look after your girls and young men, and the things that you tell them and all the rest of it, the things that they watch. Love Island. what kind of rubbish is that? But you know what? I try to get into it because I want to know what they're feeding on, so that I can come to them from a spiritual angle and be able to minister to them from an informed place. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we just have to be very careful. But our young ones coming up, it's equally important that we share with them, we minister to them, we show that love and say, you need to love yourself first. Because if it's one thing, I had a friend and she broke up with her long-term boyfriend. And one of the things he said to her was that you don't love yourself. And I find that really hard to deal with. You just don't love yourself. And it split. And she was heartbroken. So there's just lots of lessons to be learned here. And we learn from each other. Just lots of lessons. And we keep on praying.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of good points you made there. There's loads of, particularly young people. I've seen some people that I know they used to attend our church even. And even some, I would be careful what I'm saying here because we're online. Social media can be a real, how can I say, it falsifies, it puts this sense of falsehood. I've seen people on social media and I just thinking, like Benetton, the reggae artist, says, Instagram, you don't look like your Instagram picture. Because the reality is that there's some people that I've seen, they're dark and they've made themselves look lighter. They've done so many different, with so many apps now that can Photoshop your image and whatever. Your older face can look younger. You can get rid of the grays. You can hide the freckles. You can hide this, and you can look fitter than you are. And I remember seeing a video of someone who went to look for this girl that he met on social media. And he knocked on the door, and the person came out, and he said, for example, he said, I came to see Jane, and it was Jane that answered. He said, no, I came to see Jane, and it was Jane at the door, but she didn't look nothing like what he saw online, and he was very upset. Good thing he went with a friend. But the emphasis is that aside, because that's exterior, when it comes to relational things, and I think like what Shirley said, you're dealing with people who have a particular mindset of what someone looks like, without really considering, could I live with this person for the rest of my life? What's this person's value system? Did this person have integrity? Can this person truly love me? And sometimes also people are coming from a place of brokenness. So they go into a relationship with that brokenness, expecting that person to fix it, when the only person that can fix our brokenness is God. So the esteem that we have, we go looking for love in all the wrong places. And that's the bottom line. And we need to talk to our young men about this. We need to talk to our young women about this. I mean, and I think, let's say, sometimes the church, we can only do so many things on a Sunday, in a Friday, but when we have men's meetings, women's meetings, another young woman, whatever, but there is a core. When I think of young men, I went to all boys school, and it was one of my school teachers that talked to us in plain English that helped us to look at how we deal with women. And he challenged us because we felt, we were boastful and we were very sure of ourselves, and we just didn't really consider women. We thought of them as inferior because, as far as they're concerned, we just wanted to get as many girls, and we just want to show off that, we got a girl that's immaculate, we got one in Holy Childhood, we got one at St. Hugh's, we got one at Wolmer's, and it was just one alpha until they all meet up and want to chase you down the street with a knife. But the emphasis, story of my days. But those are the things that you look back and thinking, what was that about? And it becomes a repetitive cycle. Then I realized where I got it from. So my dad did the same thing. And I realized, whoa, who is teaching us how to be a man? Who's teaching us? Who's our heroes? Who is our example? Have we ever sat around a man who's treated a woman right and be a model for us? Because that's what Jesus says. Even if you didn't have the example, love your wife as Christ loves the church. And so our example comes from the Bible. And who's teaching our young men about what the Bible says? in regards to how we should be? Who's teaching them about Proverbs when Solomon talks about the young man that's foolish enough to go down to the woman's house when her husband's not home? You know, we need to educate them from the scriptures and from our own life experiences, the mistakes we made, and say, listen, guys, it may be fun now, but it catches up with you, you know. And I saw those conversations, and in that way, a lot of the guys, even I believe, that's womanizing and doing all this stuff, they suffer from low self-esteem. They don't love themselves, like my sister said. And if you don't love yourself, they have no business in a relationship. If you can't love yourself, you have no business in a relationship, because if you can't love yourself, the Bible said we should love our neighbor to the same degree as we love ourselves. And so you're not going to be able to love my daughter if you don't love yourself. You're not going to be able to love my son if you don't love yourself. And I think someone has to ask those questions to whoever will come in your door or in your relationship. They'll come in thinking, you know, because you have, and purpose is so important. When we spoke to the millennials a couple of weeks ago, myself and Pastor Obina, the number one thing they talked about was purpose. They wanted to know their purpose. Now, if you don't know your purpose in life, someone else will dictate it for you. Someone else, that's why you find a lot of people follow. Are you a follower or you're a leader? And I think we need to build, and when I'm talking about church life, it's a constant evolving, building, and we're not the same. I was listening to an interview, while I don't subscribe to his philosophies, with Louis Farrakhan. He was being interviewed by a CNN reporter, and he was asked the question about some statements he'd made back in the day. And he said he made those statements because at that time he was a warrior, and he still is. He said, if you come at me a certain way, I'm going to manifest a particular way because that's who I am. But he said over the years he's matured in how he communicates and how he shares his dogma, etc. But in the light of how we ourselves, when we have been through a difficult patch, like many have said earlier, that when you've gone through a series of events or gone through a series of just life cycles, you come to a place where you can't put up with foolishness anymore. I remember reading a book by Bishop Jakes. There's a book he's got, I've got it in my library somewhere, and he talks about the fact that you got married once and then you get married the second time, it doesn't mean it's going to be easier. He said what happens is that you recognize that your tolerance is less for certain things. He said the chance of your marriage surviving the second marriage or the third marriage is very unlikely. This doesn't mean that because you've married 3 times mean that you're going to be very good at marriage. The fact that you're married 3 times shows that there's a problem. But unless you're, the person died, and then we may have to do some investigation, some forensics on that, why. But the emphasis is you have to look at your tolerance for foolishness kind of starts to go. And most of us, as we get older, you realize there's certain things that you're not going to be tolerant of anymore anyway. If God forbid something happened to one of our spouses and we had to remarry or whatever, it's not going to be better than it was automatically. You're going to have to look and think, because normally we think maybe because I've got older, I'm going to get wiser. Not necessarily. It's just that your tolerance level for certain things is like, I ain't got time for that. That socks ain't going to wash itself. Those plates are not going to wash, because there's certain things you don't see in dating because you go out to eat. And I think one of the things as well, when you go dating, I don't do that kind of thing, but when you go dating, you don't see what a person is like, whether they have home economics, whether they have understanding of the practicalities of everyday living, etc., etc. And so those things, as far as self-esteem is concerned, we could have a whole series just based on that. And I think it's something needful to talk about within the church, because esteem is so needful. When the Bible states that we should esteem one another higher than ourselves, you have to esteem someone higher than yourself. You have to have strong stuff to be able to have a conversation. It's not all about you, where you can have a conversation or a relationship with someone and you can put them first. You can be considerate, where you think, you know what, there are times when I know if my wife is coming home from work and she's going to come home tired, I'm at home, I'm not expecting her to come home and cook. I'm going to make sure that there's a meal ready for her, that when she comes in, she's not going to be like, oh, I'm looking to say, oh, you know, when is the dinner, you know, I'm not that kind of person, you know, or something needs to happen, you know, you get the Hoover, you got to be able to contribute to the welfare of the house. It's just when you start having children, there has to be a level of balancing and not mishmash. So there's a whole lot of stuff that people never really talk about because they don't plan, they don't think ahead of you know, they normally think about right now, satisfying the needs now, and we're not looking down the road that we need to work on the relationship to the point that when things get tough, then we don't run, we fight. We do whatever we need to do to maintain. And there's a lot of things that we could address on this issue. I see my wife, she put her hand up, so then we're going to move on after that. Go for it.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear what you've taught today in regards to, you know, self-esteem and high self-esteem. You just brought memory. I think I've testified of the relationship I had in the past, whereby, you know, the boyfriend I had gone out with committed suicide, and just say to myself, wow, you know, I think coming from a background or from a home, from a family where my self-esteem was high, brought to my awareness, because, okay, you know, in the time of dating, you know, men, you know very well that sometimes they're very good catchers, you know, in their sweet talk, in their, you know, in the time when they see a woman. And this guy was so good with his words, to an extent that he treated me so, should I say, things that I want, he would just, you know, not want, but he gave me a lot of materials, things, and very good cook and everything. So that's the type of person he was. He really showed that area. But as the time went by in this relationship, this person was suffering from low self-esteem, insecurity, and things didn't go right. And suddenly this person changed, and I was really caught in this relationship. I didn't know how to get out of it, because he was a person that if I leave, I'm going to commit suicide. So he used to always say that to me. So I was fearful, you know, I was wondering what to do, and the relationship got worse as time went by. But I had to say, there is no way that I'm staying in this relationship, because this person has a serious issue. So the way to come out of this problem or this situation, I didn't know what to do. I went to my family, should I say my sisters, my cousin, and it was really hard. But I had to make a decision, that strong decision, and say, you know, because I'm a woman who have a high self-esteem, and I said, there is no way this man is going to hold me back, you know, because he hasn't got nothing to give me. And I had to stand my ground and say, this relationship is finished. And that word alone, you know, drove this person to an evil nature, to an extent that I had to run away from North London, come to South London, leave my job, because he was obsessed, should I say, to an extent. Being a hairdresser, went to my workplace and really destroyed the salon. That's how bad it was. And then as time went by, yes, he committed suicide. He killed himself. So the police had to come and relate that to me. So I think in the area of teaching our daughters or our sons in regards to, very important that to have high self-esteem is so important. To love yourself is so important, because I think the men of nowadays, I'd say, where our society is out there, you know, there's so many people, or men or women, whose self-esteem is really low, very insecure. So if you're a girl, or I mean a lady who's dating, and you know, this person shows this type of behavior, that's not the relationship that you ought to be, because as years go by, you know, that person will be such should I say, very controlling and very manipulative or very selfish, you know, but this person, which is sad, this is a son of somebody that, you know, killed himself because I addressed that this relationship is finished. So it really brought back that memory of the importance of having a high self-esteem, learning to love yourself. You know, that when you go into a relationship, you would know who you know, who this person is, whether that person is good to continue and be committed, or that person to say, no, I don't like this area, and this is not how a person should behave, or something like that. So I just want to relay that.
Thank you. I don't know how important this is to people, because I'm mindful of the time. And like I said, I had 7 things, and there's no way I'm going to get through the 7th because we're still on number 1. And it's critical that we address this issue, because self-esteem is so needful, and it's such a subject that, you know, I'm not going to have another Bible studies next week. Like I said, we're on recess, but I realize it's an issue that really, 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 really needs to be addressed. And I think from all levels, it's built from from childhood. And if we were to open up and give people a chance to talk about where they're coming from, at some point in your life, you can point to a place where your self-esteem started to grow or it started to diminish. And how we communicate to our children is so important, how we build their esteem. Because if we're always doing things for them, it's like, always remember the statement that it's not what you do for your children that they'll remember, it's what they do for themselves. And you got to, because sometimes even as parents, we can be very controlling. We want to do everything for them, and we're not really helping them. So we gotta release the cord sometimes and allow them to do things, allow them to fall down, allow them to make mistakes, allow them to, you know, experience life, and that they can be able to do things for themselves. And so we have to try and help to nurture the esteem of individuals within the church that come in, because people coming into us broken, people coming into us with all kinds of stories and issues. Can we be like the Good Samaritan, regardless of whatever they're going through, that we take them to the inn, the church, and ask someone, please take care of them. And this is what Jesus has done, like the Good Samaritan. He's brought people to us and said, you take care of them, I'm coming back. When I come back, I'm going to sort out the bill. And the reality is that we don't know what people's stories. Sometimes you'll never know people's stories until we really take time to start addressing the wounds. Some of you have stories that we've never heard before, until we start getting close and we start talking about things like these. Then we're thinking, oh, wow. And it shouldn't be puzzling to us, because we've handled life over years. And it's life skills. Like when you bring someone into a hospital, the nurses are trained to deal with it. Even though they're trained, some things are still going to shock them. I'm sure Marlene, in her experience as a nurse, I don't see any of the medicals, but you will see, even though in your years of experience in the medical field, there'll always be someone that comes in that makes you think, oh, we've seen that one before. It's like COVID. It's not a new thing. Corona, you know, this whole virus, you know, it's a known thing. It's not, they had SARS a couple of years ago. They had Ebola. They had all kind of different things, AIDS, but disease is disease, and you have to deal with things within its context. And in the present time, you have to deal with what is before you. How do you handle that? How do you address the issue? And sometimes we're so spiritual that we never address some core issues that people, they don't need you to pray for them for 3 hours. They just need to say, they just need to speak, and you listen. And don't try and fix it. Sometimes we just want to fix everybody, and that's not our job. Our job is to just really let Jesus do the fixing, because he's the master builder. He's the master fixer, and we need to understand that, because it takes years and years. I remember the first time our wife was telling me about her story. Maybe we should have had that conversation before we even got married. I found out about her story, her background, you know, after we got married, and I was like, what the heck? You know, like, you know, how, when, who, whatever. It was a big shock to me. I was like, I think I felt like someone burst my balloon, like, what? But we never had those conversations. We never had any counseling. And maybe things, I don't know if we would have been married if I'd gone, I don't know, God knows. But the emphasis is, I'm online, aren't I? No, but the reality, I'm very honest and open. I'm just using it as an example to say that sometimes you find out things in a relationship and you're thinking, oh, that makes sense. And you're thinking, because we're not open, we cover up, we don't say things. I'm not saying this is what happened, because we were at a different place. We got married because that's what the church did. You like someone in church, you just engage with them, get married, and that's it. That's old school. I mean, that was just foolishness back in the day. But we survived. We came through that. We overcame. I don't use the word overcame rather than survive. And thank God we went through the process. We spent years thinking, is he the one, is she the one? Until we got to the point of saying, it doesn't matter now, let's get on with it. You know, the emphasis that the experience we've had gives us the ability to help others to say, listen, guys, don't walk down that road. Don't take that path. Don't be going to relationship blind. Don't be ignorant. I think I was speaking to the leaders yesterday. I think we're living in a time where we cannot allow ignorance to be a friend. Ignorance just means you don't know. And this is what Tony Evans was saying in this meeting with the TBN guy, Kirk Franklin and Robert Morris. He said, we cannot afford to be ignorant anymore. Ignorance is not acceptable in any level, in any situation. You would not sign a deed for a house without checking the details. You know, we do things on a natural level, and there's certain things that would never get into certain transactions ignorantly, meaning I don't know anything about it, I'm just going to go and get it. You'd go into a car showroom and just pick out a car. Oh, I like that car because it's yellow. And you've never done a background check to thinking, what is this car about? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, we have to go into relationships thinking, am I going to be able to, can I maintain this person? Because some people are high maintenance. How many of you ever met someone who's high maintenance and thinking, I can't afford that. She's pretty, he's really handsome, but I can't afford that. I really don't have the energy, and I don't have that amount of fruit of the Spirit yet to deal with that person. Because eventually what will happen, the person will start manifesting, and you're like having to call your bishop, would bring the oil and bring the elders because this person needs deliverance. You know, call the police. You know, and when someone starts manifesting, oh Lord have mercy. So we need to deal with that. And trust me, high maintenance personality disorder. You'd be amazed because you marry Stephen, all of a sudden he becomes Vincent, and you're thinking, Lord have mercy, and he's become David. All he's thinking, holy for them. And you know, the emphasis is like, God, can we get some help? And those are the things that we don't talk about sometimes in church. And a whole month of Sundays preaching cannot get to the root of that problem until we go deep. And I think it's what we do, Bible studies and other settings, that we need to say. I say to people like Richard, men's leader, and to the pastors, let's find a way to help our young men not to make the mistakes we made. How do we engage them in that conversation? To start speaking to people like William from now. You know, he's a young man. He's thinking, he's too young for that. Man, this is the time to talk to him. When I was William's age, I couldn't tell you what I was doing. Trust me. If my mom knew what I did when I was William's age, I mean, she'd beat me even now, and I'm like 51. You understand what I'm saying? So we need to have those, and sometimes those are the smart things, isn't it? We think that we don't even know what our children do when we're not around. Because my mom surely didn't know what I was doing when she wasn't around. God knows. You know, I used to come home from school late, and she never really checked to find out where was I, whatever, because she was otherwise engaged in her own life or whatever else. But I'm telling you, we have to check. We cannot allow our kids to get away with those things. We have to find a way to help one another. So self-esteem, I think we'll park the car there or the bus there and pick it up another time. Any other questions? Someone's hands up. I think Charlene, did Charlene have her hand up, or is it just a high five? Richard.
I think, I mean, I'm listening to some of the conversation as well, and it's as if we want ready-made relationship. I mean, sometimes you need a woman who will just eat some fish and chip with you. You don't have to lay the table. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? Because you must be able to see the potential in a relationship. And sometimes it can be too demanding from the offset, where you want all the best things and the man just don't have it. And so you have to look at sometimes these me people and I and what I want. Mm-hmm. And they don't see the potential in the relationship, but the demand is already there.
Yeah. I think it's important you go into the relationship with a conversation. I think you have to communicate your intentions. And I think for men, I think for women, they want to know, can you take care of me? Do you have a vision? I think a woman will stick with a man if he has a vision, because they want to know, where are we going? You know, and I always listen, was it Miles Monroe? He gave a phenomenal teaching on relationships. I mean, he's still a legend when it comes to, he's written so much stuff on it and talks about it. And he talks about, one of the first things he says, a man has to have an affinity with divinity. If the man doesn't love God's presence, run. Because if a man doesn't love the presence of God, he will always malfunction. He'll always manifest dysfunction. So if he doesn't, because it's like, this is where, when God created Adam had everything before he met Eve. He was in a good place before he had a house. He had a place where he lived. He had a job. You know, he had a relationship with God. So he was very close to God. So you don't want to get into a relationship because a man looks a certain way. It's when I was driving somewhere today and I saw this girl on the street and I was thinking to myself, I was thinking, now would a girl like her be interested in a guy like that? And I was looking across the street, and my mind is always active thinking things. And I understood this because from school days, I always remember there's some girls you couldn't get. How many guys know what I'm talking about? No brothers helping me out. Okay, you guys are all proper men. Okay. But in my thinking, my philosophy, my mind works very active. And I'm thinking the particular reasons why some girls never like certain guys, because the one, they weren't athletic. Two, they wanted to, because women want security in a relationship. They want security. They want to know that, they want to feel like Shirley said, they want to think, if I'm with this guy, I'm going to feel like I'm going to feel really good because he looks the part, even if he doesn't have any sense sometimes in his head. And he may have a particular talent. Sometimes girls go after guys who are talented. That's why the track team and the football team always had, if you watch movies or if you've been around, some of you girls, you know what I'm talking about. You kind of hung out with the guys that were well popular, the guys that were good singers, the guys that were good at this or that. You like them because they ran for the school or swam for the school, played basketball, blah, 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 blah. You're drawn to them because of how they look, also because of their skill set. No one went for the nerd, so to speak, because they couldn't see any potential in the nerd. That's what they're concerned. It wasn't cool to be with the nerd. But it's a nerd that's going to pay the bills. He's the one who's going to give you the big house. But it's later on, isn't it, where the nerd becomes the boss of the person that, you follow what I'm saying? So school kind of flips it, because the guy that you wouldn't even talk to at school is now the one that owns the company. And now he can get all the girls he wants. He couldn't get any girl when he was at school because he looked like he was the total, you know what I'm saying? I mean, guys, you're not helping me here tonight. You just kind of, yeah. But the reality now that you've grown up and you did your studies, you didn't fool around, you didn't do any foolishness. Now that you're the boss man, you can choose which girl you want. Those are the things we need to talk to our guys about. I've got a wonderful picture on my phone of a guy and a girl together. And the picture, one of the pictures, is two pictures, the same picture, just kind of doubled up next to each other. And one of the things says, what I would want to advise my son, and one I'd advise my daughter. Because you see what happens when you look at the picture from a girl's point of view, you see this fat guy and he's got his arms around a beautiful woman. You're thinking, how did he get that girl? It's only because he went and did what he needed to do. And then you look at this girl and you're thinking, how did she get this guy? And you look at it thinking, how did she get, why would she even be with this guy? And the reason why she's with this guy is because she feels secure. From his perspective, he can get her because he's got what everything she needs. And from her perspective is that I feel safe with him. Maybe she looked beautiful with a guy her age, as slim as she is, but that guy ain't got no money. He ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? And it's a question in the olden days, back in the day, the older men would marry the younger woman. And it's cultural, you see that in some of our societies, some of our parents, the father is older than the mother or whatever, because that was tradition, some cultures, and because there's a level of maturity in a man. When I was going to school, there's a girl I really liked. She was my age, same high school, not same high school, but same form. And she had my heart. If I could give her my heart, she could just take it and crush it. But then she liked a guy that was driving a bus. I'm like, for real? And the fact is that she just kind of felt like I was just chasing women. I was just trying to just jack her up. But he was more like he was going to take care of her. He was buying her stuff and putting chain around her neck and stuff like that. I couldn't do that. I was at school. But, it didn't work, thankfully. But the emphasis is that people look at relationships for different things. And I think those are the conversations we need to have. That really, I think it's more relative than a lot of things that we talk about sometimes, because that's where people are at, isn't it? And like Richard said, sometimes we're looking for a Harry, Prince Harry, if you like a redhead freckled person. But the emphasis is like, yeah, man, we need to deal with the real stuff. the prince doesn't always come, and we have a prince already in our church, and it's Prince Sabina. So Christy got him. So, when you have a name like Prince, all the girls are going to love you because he must be worth a lot of money. So that's royalty already. So, you know what I'm saying? But the emphasis is that you have to really, these are some of the things that we never talk about. We need to address and thinking, God, help my esteem, help me to nurture it, coach it, speak to our people about it, because, wow, a lot of families end up in a place where right now they're battling. They wish they're kind of feeling, it's not a good thing. But by the grace of God, we can change it. We can make a difference. And if you're in that place tonight, I reach out to you in faith and in prayer that your esteem will not take a baton, because some of you are better than where you are right now. What you're looking at in the mirror doesn't define. I heard someone say that this young boy, I think I posted a video of him on Facebook today, and he was talking about your reflection in the mirror doesn't define who you are. Because sometimes we look in the mirror and thinking, I don't really like Michael Jackson saying, I'm looking at the man in the mirror and I'm telling him to change his ways. We need to love the person we see on the other side of the mirror. And whatever you're going through doesn't define you. And you don't have to suffer in silence, because God wants us to reach out and to help one another. And I think the key is that help is on its way. Help is here through Christ. And he's here for us. And I think what I'm looking at is not just dealing with just the young people, because sometimes we think it's just the young people, but the older people need it as well. Because some people, all their lives they've lived and they've never had their esteem lifted. They don't take care of themselves. They let themselves go because they've settled on their lees. And there's a verse in, I think it's Jeremiah, that because we hadn't been poured from vessel to vessel, we have rested on our lees. And we need to be, back in the day when you used to make drinks with the sugar and the lime and Kool-Aid, Quench-Aid or whatever, at the bottom, the sediment would have rested. Who drinks that? No one drinks that. Everyone wants to drink the flow, but we don't want to settle on that which is at the bottom. And I think we've got to a place where we just settle in, and no one wants to be a pioneer. No one wants to step out and start something new. So I pray that we've covered a lot tonight, and I pray that something said was a blessing. Is Charlene's hands raised? Is it raised?
Yeah, it was raised earlier on when Sister Sabla was talking.
Okay. Sorry.
What I wanted to say, Bishop, my younger self, I would have done exactly what Sister Sabla did. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have said if I came from that kind of background regarding that kind of issue, because of fear of being judged. Although you were in that position, because sometimes as women, especially when you've got a history, you fear people judging your past.
Yeah.
So you only give them highlights and you leave the details until you can trust them.
Yeah.
And this is a reality even for marriages. We don't really open ourselves to our other half until we feel secure. Mm. So what Sister Sabra did is what I would have done. Yeah. And honest, I would never have disclosed anything like that unless it was like 3-4 years in the marriage where I was secure, just out of fear.
It's a serious issue, though.
It's a serious issue. It's wrong. Maybe some people will think it's wrong, but it's how people take it, how you feel you'll be judged by others.
And also the likelihood of rejection. You're thinking, if this person knows this, I'm going to be left on the shelf, and I've got to go through this again. Blah blah blah. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yes.
I hear you.
Yes.
Yeah. It's serious. That's a story and a half, isn't it? The reality is that we all have a past. We all come from somewhere. We all have a background. If we were to do a interrogation on things that we did and whatever else, it's grace, isn't it? And so we come to the tape and we're thinking, okay, I'm not the real deal, but I think it's good. Can we put the real person on the stage rather than trying to invent someone as a perfect? And I think that's what Hollywood does. They try and make out, as handsome as Brad Pitt is, he's on his how many wives has he had now? You look at someone like Angelina Jolie, she's absolutely beautiful woman. If you like that kind of person, You know, you can mention the names. Halle Berry is another one that's you know, finer than wine, but she's been through some really terrible relationships. And we see the House of Windsor, royal family, wealthy family. Nearly all the children has had real mess up. Hopefully, we pray for Harry that he doesn't fall into that trap, and William. But the reality is that sin, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. And, you know, it's not a judgment thing, it's a life thing. And we have to just pray through and ask God to help us stage by stage, age by age, that we grow in grace and be gracious to others who go through it. Because sometimes we feel, well, that's not me. So we're quick, we buy the newspapers, we read all the magazines about people's lives. We're just inner people's business. And we're not quite dealing with our own issues. And but so help us God. Anyway, guys, we want to thank you for tonight. We think, oh, Geraldine, one more time.
Sorry, I was just going to say quickly, when you were talking about sort of the things that you know, girls when they're younger are drawn to, or guys conversely are drawn to, I think it's important not to conflate, because it's so easy for it to happen, confidence with self-esteem. Because often a lot of the times, you know, like the guy who's the top football player or basketball player, whoever, just because he or whoever it is has got a thing that they're good at, sometimes that becomes the thing that they can rely upon, or that's the thing that people solely focus on. But inside, they can be all kinds of messed up. And I think when we're talking, when, you know, my sister Shirley was talking earlier about what young people are focused on at the moment with image and that kind of thing, I think there's so much of a focus upon the image, upon the exterior, but it doesn't focus on what's inside, and that ultimately relates to your relationship, your knowledge of who you are in Christ as a creation of Christ. Because if you start there, then you know that your purpose, you've been created specifically for a specific purpose. So you're far bigger than all of that external stuff. But a lot of our young people, you see it on Instagram a lot, with the way that they curate their images and all this kind of thing. It's people have gotten self-esteem and confidence completely mixed up. And then you hear of, you know, sadly, people who are in the public eye who look like they have everything, you know, going overdose or kill themselves or do whatever. So I think it's one of the important things that we have to, especially when we're talking to our young people, but actually to all of us, not to conflate the two things.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, because as you were speaking, what came to my mind is a song that one of Kirk Franklin's albums, and he talked in the song, the lyrics, he says, "The preacher taught me how to preach, to speak in tongues, but he never taught me what to do when the tongue's done." And I think that's a critical thing. So we teach them how to do spiritual things, but we never tell them what next when the tongue is done. When you stop speaking in tongues, can you be a man? Can you be a good husband? Can you take care of this and that? And I think that's a good point, actually. Absolutely fantastic, because the reality, we see this in life, isn't it? I think I mentioned about Diego Maradona. Maradona, the player, was phenomenal, but Diego, the man, drug addict. His life was messed up. Unfortunately, George Best, one of probably the most finest football players ever, got a liver transplant and still went back and got himself drunk. He can't help himself. He played for Man United, but you know, that's all. That's but jokes aside, it's the reality is that character, where do you get it from? You know, is something. I think the need for father figures today to really educate our boys and girls just alike, and that's a church environment is a great place for people, if we be real, because we see a lot of this in the church. We focus on gifting and talent, and we kind of, like you said, we don't pay attention to those needful things. And unfortunately, in the time I've been in church, from the time my wife and I got married, we've seen a lot of people get married the same time as us, and many of them today are not married anymore, unfortunately. And they all were as committed as we are to God. But along the way, stuff happens, and it's not that we were any better than them, and we never say that. It's just that how they handled stuff is, you know, and it's sad. It's sad. So, however, finally, my brethren, I think we're done here. I pray that this series has been useful to you. I pray that it's not just been us fluffing and this, but I believe that some substance that we have deposited, let these seeds be a harvest in due course. our lines are open. You can call us and speak to us anytime about anything that we talked about throughout the whole series. You can reach out to us, and we want to engage, because I think this is the way the church is supposed to be, that we can engage on these issues. I hope you found the series useful, and that somehow it can benefit you in any way, shape, or form as we push on. And with no way, I think we're still kind of scratching the surface, as in raking the leaves. There's so much to this topic, but it couldn't be what it is now without your support and your help. So again, well done to you all. Praise God. So we're signing off YouTube. Thank you guys for being with us online.